November 24th, 1945, 6:47 in the morning. Frida Muller stood in the mess hall of Riverside Ranch, Montana, staring at a plate that made no sense. 27 years old, former Wehrmacht communications officer, believer in the Reich, and now prisoner of war in the belly of the beast itself. The plate sat before her like an accusation. Bacon, 6 strips crispy at the edges, fat glistening in the early light. Scrambled eggs, real eggs folded with butter that pulled yellow and rich. Toast with jam. Not the ersatz jam made from beets and hope, but actual strawberry preserves, red and sweet smelling. And coffee. God in heaven coffee. Not the burnt grain water they called coffee in Germany. This was the real thing, steaming dark as Montana soil, smelling like every morning she had dreamed about for the last 2 years. For 3 weeks she had eaten American food with suspicion, waiting for the poison, the sickness, the proof that everything she had been taught was true. Her training officer, a thin woman with dead eyes, had warned her before deployment. American food is poison, the officer had said. Their coffee tastes like mud. Their meat is rotten. They will try to weaken you with their filth. Do not trust anything they give you. But now, the smell, it rose from the plate like a prayer, like a memory of being human. Frida's hands trembled. Around her, 22 other German women sat at long tables, all staring at similar plates, all frozen between hunger and fear. She picked up a strip of bacon, still warm. The fat left a shine on her fingertips. She brought it to her lips, closed her eyes, and bit down. The taste exploded across her tongue. Salt, smoke, the sweetness of pork fat rendered perfect, crispy edges giving way to tender meat. After 2 years of sawdust bread, after 6 months of watery soup in prisoner camps, after endless gray days of near starvation in the Wehrmacht, this was food. This was what human beings were supposed to eat. Frida Muller, hardened by war, trained by Nazis, proud soldier of the Reich, sat down at that table and wept into her bacon. Her shoulders shook. Tears fell onto the eggs, onto the toast, mixing with butter and jam. Around her, the other prisoners watched. Then one by one they began to eat. And one by one they began to cry. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that the American ranch hands standing guard shifted uncomfortably, not knowing whether to intervene or look away. What you just witnessed was the moment 23 German prisoners of war discovered they had been lied to about everything. For 12 years, the Nazi regime had told them America was weak, decadent, controlled by Jews and blacks, a nation of cowards and criminals. Then they landed in Montana, and the truth broke them like the first crack in a dam that would soon crumble. This is the story of how a Thanksgiving dinner in 1945 ended a war that still raged in their hearts long after Germany surrendered. But Frida's breakdown over bacon was nothing compared to what happened when she met the man who saved her life 3 times without Frida even knowing it. The lie they believed freeze this moment. Zoom out from that mess hall. Pull back through the mountains, across the prairie, over the Atlantic, back through time itself. Because to understand why 23 women were crying over breakfast in Montana, you have to understand the lie. The 23 women who arrived at Riverside Ranch in November 1944 were not just soldiers, they were true believers. From 1933 to 1944, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had fed them a steady diet of carefully crafted falsehoods. America is run by Jews who enslave the white working class. Americans are mongrels with no culture, no honor, no discipline. Their soldiers are cowards who only win through numbers. Their food is tasteless. Their cities are slums. Their women are prostitutes. These were not whispered rumors. These were facts taught in schools, broadcast on radio, printed in newspapers, repeated until they became truth. Catherine Weber's 26th former signals officer in the Wehrmacht, called Cat by everyone who knew her, had memorized these facts in Hitler Youth. She could recite them like catechism. She had seen the propaganda posters plastered across Berlin. Grotesque caricatures of Americans as fat, lazy, cigar-smoking capitalists. Drawings of President Roosevelt as a puppet controlled by hook-nosed Jewish bankers. Images of New York as a cesspool of crime and degeneracy. Emma Hartmann, 24, former nurse in the Luftwaffe, believed Americans put German prisoners in cages like animals. She had heard stories of torture, of starvation, of medical experiments. In her mind, capture meant death or worse. Greta Neumann, 19, daughter of a baker in Stuttgart, expected to be shot on arrival in America. Her older brother had told her before he deployed to the Eastern Front that the Americans showed no mercy, that they executed prisoners without trial. She spent her first 3 days in American custody waiting for the bullet. They were wrong about everything, but the truth would be even more shocking than the lies. Journey to the New World, captured in Belgium, September 1944. The Allied advance had been swift, brutal, efficient. Kat's radio station was overrun by American infantry before she could destroy her equipment. Emma's field hospital was surrounded by British tanks. Greta's supply depot was bombed and she surrendered waving a white flag made from a bedsheet. They were processed through camps in France, photographed, fingerprinted, assigned prisoner numbers, then loaded onto cargo ships for the Atlantic crossing. 3 weeks at sea in cramped holds below deck, seasick, terrified. The ship lurched and rolled through autumn storms. Women vomited into buckets, prayed in whispers, held each other when the fear became too much. At night, Kat could hear crying from every corner of the hold. Not loud, just constant. The sound of people who believed they were sailing toward their deaths. When the ship entered New York Harbor, a guard opened the hatches and told them they could come up on deck for fresh air. Kat climbed the ladder first, emerged into brilliant September sunshine, and saw the Statue of Liberty. She had been taught it was built by Jewish plutocrats to mock the working man, a symbol of false promises and capitalist oppression. But standing there, hands gripping the rail, watching that enormous green woman rise from the harbor port, held high, Kat thought, it looks beautiful. Emma climbed up beside her, shielding her eyes against the sun. Where are the slums, she murmured. Where are the factories belching smoke? Where are the starving people? The skyline of Manhattan stretched before them, tall buildings gleaming in afternoon light, ships moving through clean water, people visible on distant docks going about their business. It did not look like hell. It looked like a postcard. They were loaded onto trains. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois, Nebraska, Wyoming. 3 days crossing a country that seemed to have no end. The prisoners pressed their faces to windows watching America roll past. Endless farmland, small towns with white churches, children playing baseball in dusty lots, cows grazing in green pastures. Greta, who had expected concentration camps and barbed wire, saw a farmer waving at the train. Just waving, a friendly gesture to strangers passing through. She turned to Emma. Why would he wave at us? Emma had no answer. The real shock would come when they met Thomas Hendricks, a man who had every reason to hate them and every reason to kill them. The man who lost everything. Thomas Hendricks was 46 years old when the trucks arrived at his ranch. People called him Tom. His face was weathered by decades of Montana sun and wind carved into lines that told stories of hard work and harder winters. Calloused hands that could rope a steer mend a fence or cradle a newborn calf with equal skill. Eyes that had not smiled since June 6, 1944. His son, Robert Hendricks, everyone called him Bobby, had died on Omaha Beach. 22 years old. First wave. The telegram said he did not make it 20 yards up the sand, cut down by German machine gun fire before he could even use his rifle. Tom got the telegram while branding cattle. One of his ranch hands brought it out to the pasture, face pale, hands shaking. Tom took the yellow paper, read it 3 times. Then he walked to the barn and did not come out for 2 days. His wife, Margaret Hendricks Maggie, to everyone who loved her, 44 years old, found him sitting in Bobby's old room. He was holding a baseball glove, the leather worn soft from years of use. Bobby's glove, the one Tom had bought him when he turned 12. She sat beside him on the narrow bed, did not speak, just sat. Finally, Tom said, "We have to keep going." Maggie said, "For what?" That question hung between them for months. For what? Why keep the ranch running? Why get up in the morning? Why do anything when your only child, your son, the boy who used to ride on your shoulders and laugh at clouds shaped like horses, is buried in France with thousands of other boys who did not make it home? Now, 6 months later, the United States Army was sending him 23 German women to work his ranch. The same people who killed his boy. The same people he had dreamed about choking with his bare hands in the long, sleepless nights after the telegram arrived. Captain David Lawrence Young, barely old enough to grow a proper mustache, stood on Tom's porch with official orders. His eyes would not meet Tom's face. The government needs facilities for female prisoners of war, Lawrence said. Your ranch was selected due to isolation and available labor capacity. Tom said nothing. He watched 3 military trucks pull up his dirt road canvas flaps, hiding the faces inside. His hand drifted to his belt, where he kept a Colt 45. For 5 seconds, maybe 10, he considered it, drawing the gun, ending this before it started. Then Maggie's hand touched his shoulder. Her voice was soft but firm. Tom, don't. He looked at his wife, saw in her eyes the same pain he carried, the same grief, but also something else. Something he could not name, but recognized as the reason he married her 23 years ago. His hand moved away from the gun. Arrival November 10th, 1944. 4:17 in the afternoon. The truck stopped, diesel engines coughing into silence. The canvas flaps were pulled back, and the women climbed out stiff from hours of travel, cold from Montana autumn air. What they saw made no sense. Mountains. The Absaroka Range stretched across the horizon like a cathedral made of stone and sky. Not the Alps. These were bigger, wilder, painted gold and red by the setting sun. Peaks touched clouds. Shadows fell in purple sheets across valleys that seemed to drop forever. Space. Endless space. No bombed-out cities. No rubble. No craters. Just grass rolling toward infinity, yellow and brown, moving like water in the wind. Cattle grazing. A river glittering in the distance, catching the last light. Trees along the riverbank turning gold, leaves falling slow. Silence. No air raid sirens. No artillery thunder. No screaming. Just wind and the sound of a horse neighing in the barn. Birds calling. The creak of the windmill turning. Kat thought, this does not look like hell. Emma thought, this looks like heaven. Greta started crying, not from fear, from beauty. Because how could a place this beautiful exist in a world that had shown her only ugliness for the last 2 years? One of the guards, a tall black man with kind eyes, helped an elderly prisoner down from the truck. His hands were gentle, steadying. He smiled and said, "Watch your step, ma'am, ma'am." He called a German prisoner of war, ma'am. Kat stared at him. In Germany, she had been taught that black people were subhuman, inferior, dangerous. But this man had a kind face, soft voice. He treated the elderly woman like she was his own grandmother. The guard's name was Samuel Washington, 28 years old, third-generation Montanan. His grandfather had been born into slavery in Mississippi, escaped north, built a life in a state where a black man could own land. Samuel had grown up facing prejudice, certainly. Montana was not paradise, but he had learned something his grandfather taught him. You judge a person by what they do, not what they look like. He looked at these German women, scared and exhausted, and saw people who needed help. So he helped. The bunkhouse. They were led to their quarters, a wooden structure, sturdy, weathered gray by wind and sun. Kat expected concrete floors, maybe straw mattresses, certainly bars on windows. Instead, a pot-bellied stove in the center, already loaded with wood ready to light. 23 cots arranged along the walls, each with an actual mattress. Not straw, not canvas stretched over boards. Real mattresses stuffed with something soft. Wool blankets folded at the foot of each cot, thick and smelling faintly of cedar. Pillows, actual pillows stuffed with feathers. Windows that let in light. Real glass not broken or boarded up. You could see through them to the mountains, to the sky, to the world. On a table near the stove, bars of soap. Real soap, not the sand and lime mixture they had used in German camps. This soap was white, smooth, smelling like lavender. Greta picked one up, brought it to her nose, inhaled. The scent brought back memories of her mother's bathroom of Sundays before the war, of a world where such small luxuries existed without guilt. She burst into tears. Emma put an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay," she murmured in German. "It's okay." But it was not okay. Nothing about this made sense. They were prisoners, enemies. They should be suffering. That was what happened to prisoners of war. That was what they had been taught, what they expected, what made sense in a world defined by conflict. Then Kat noticed something. The bunkhouse door had a latch, but the latch was on the inside. They could lock themselves in. For safety, for privacy, they were not being locked in. They were being protected. She walked to the door, tested the latch. It worked smoothly, well-oiled, clearly maintained. She looked at Emma. They are protecting us, she breathed. Emma's eyes widened, from what Kat had no answer. The Cowboys. 3 men stood outside, and guard was the wrong word for what they were. They looked like farmers, working men, cowboys. The first was Michael O'Brien. Everyone called him Mike, 29 years old, Irish-American from Boston. Red hair that stuck up no matter what he did with it, freckles across his nose, a smile that came easy and often. He wore a cowboy hat, tipped it toward the women, and said, "Evening, ladies. Name's Mike. You need anything, you holler." Ladies, not prisoners, not Krauts, not the enemy. Ladies. Samuel Washington stood by the door, rifle slung over his shoulder, but pointed down, safe, not threatening. He nodded at the women and said, "Dinner's at 6. Hope you're hungry." His voice was warm, friendly, like he was talking to neighbors, not enemies. The third guard was different. Wade Coleman, 39 years old, head foreman of Riverside Ranch, tall, broad-shouldered face carved from granite. He would lose his brother Charles in December at the Battle of the Bulge. But Wade carried the grief in advance, a premonition of loss that made him hard. He said nothing, just watched with eyes that held no warmth. But even Wade did not curse them, did not spit, did not threaten. He simply stood, observed, and kept his distance. Kat understood him. She knew grief. She recognized it in the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. This man had lost someone, and he was deciding whether to hate them for it. She wondered if he would. She wondered if she could blame him if he did. But that night, Wade would make a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. And it would happen sooner than anyone expected. The first meal, 6 o'clock. The mess hall was a long room with windows facing west, catching the last of the sunset. Long tables, wooden benches, oil lamps already lit because November darkness came early in Montana. Maggie Hendricks had prepared stew. Real beef stew with carrots, potatoes, onions. The kind that simmered all day until the meat fell apart and the vegetables melted into rich gravy. Thick slices of bread still warm from the oven. Butter, real butter, yellow and soft. Milk in glass pitchers. The women sat at the tables in silence, staring at their plates. In Nazi Germany, near the end, rations were 1 pound of bread per week, 2 ounces of meat if you were lucky. Ersatz coffee made from burnt grain that tasted like dirt in regret. No butter, no milk. Vegetables only if they grew in bomb craters or could be scavenged from ruins. Here the plates overflowed. Kat picked up her spoon. The others watched. If she ate, they would eat. If she refused, they would follow her lead. She was not their commanding officer, not officially, but she spoke English, and that made her their bridge to this strange new world. She dipped the spoon into the stew, brought it to her lips. The steam carried the scent of beef and herbs. She closed her eyes and tasted. Rich, savory, real meat that did not taste like cardboard or desperation. Vegetables that were not rotten. Bread that was soft, made from actual wheat flour, not sawdust, and false promises. She whispered in German, "God in heaven." Then she started eating with her hands. Fingers scooping stew, tearing bread, unable to maintain the pretense of civilized dining because her body was too desperate, too starved, too broken by years of inadequate food. Within seconds, all 23 women were doing the same. Hands in stew, bread torn and stuffed into mouths, drinking milk straight from pitchers, making sounds that were not quite human animal noises of need and satisfaction. Maggie Hendricks watched from the kitchen doorway. Her eyes grew bright with unshed tears. These were not monsters. These were starving children. These were daughters, sisters, someone's babies reduced to this by a war that devoured everyone it touched. She thought of Bobby, wondered if he had been hungry in those last moments on Omaha Beach, wondered if some French woman had wished she could feed him, giving him comfort, make his last hours less terrible. One prisoner, Helena Zimmerman, 32, visibly pregnant, ate too fast. Her stomach, shrunken from months of inadequate nutrition, rebelled. She pushed back from the table and vomited onto the floor. Emma, the nurse, rushed to her side. Maggie was already moving with warm water and a cloth. Helena looked up at this American woman, this enemy, who should hate her, who had every reason to let her suffer. And Helena whispered in broken English, "Why, you kind?" Maggie paused, wet cloth in her hands, looking down at this pregnant German woman who was probably younger than she looked, aged by hardship and fear. Maggie said, "Because you are a mother, and so am I." The first night, that night in the bunkhouse, sleep would not come. 23 women lay on 23 cots, watching shadows dance across wooden walls. The stove burned low, casting flickering light. Outside, coyotes called in the distance. The wind moved through the eaves, making the building creak and settle. Greta spoke into the darkness. The food was real. Emma said, "The guard called me ma'am." Another prisoner, Ingrid Vogel, 22, hardcore Nazi believer. Her father had been an SS officer, said, "It is a trick. They are fattening us up before they torture us." Kat said, "For 6 months they have had us. When does the torture start?" Silence, then Emma soft, almost afraid to say it out loud. "What if they told us the truth? What if the Americans really are different?" Ingrid hissed, "Traitor." But the seed was planted. In the dark, in the quiet, in the space between fear and hope, the women began to wonder. What if everything they knew was wrong? What if the monsters were not the Americans? What if the monsters were the people who sent them to war in the first place? Within 3 weeks, Ingrid would try to escape, and the person who saved her life would be the one she least expected. But that night, they just lay in the dark and wondered. First work. November 11th, morning came cold and clear. 5:30, a bell rang outside the bunkhouse. Time to work. The women were divided into groups. Kat found herself assigned to fence repair with Mike O'Brien and 2 other prisoners. They loaded tools into an old Ford pickup truck, wooden wire and hammers, and drove out into the pastures where winter winds had damaged the barbed wire fencing. Mike showed them how to stretch new wire tight between posts, how to twist the ends to secure them, how to dig new post holes when the old ones rotted through. He spoke slowly, used his hands to demonstrate bridging the language gap with patience and gestures. Kat watched carefully, then repeated his actions. Her hands, more accustomed to operating radio equipment than manual labor, struggled with the unfamiliar tools. The wire cutters were too large for her grip. She fumbled, dropped them, felt frustration and shame rising. Mike noticed. He pulled a pair of work gloves from his back pocket, worn but clean, and handed them to her. "Here," he said, "try these." Kat stared at the gloves. "I cannot," she said in halting English. Mike smiled. "Can't fix a fence without gloves, ma'am. Just borrow them for the day." Ma'am, again, that word, that simple dignity. She took the gloves. They were too big, but they worked. She could grip the wire cutters now, could do the job. At lunch, Mike pulled out a canteen, drank, then offered it to Kat without hesitation. In the Wehrmacht, soldiers never shared water. It was every man for himself. Survival meant taking care of yourself first always. Kat took the canteen, drank. The water was cold clean, tasting like snow from the mountains. Mike said ranch water's the best in Montana. My granddad used to say, if you drink riverside water, you'll never want to leave. Kat smiled. For the first time in 2 years, a real smile. Not forced, not bitter, just simple happiness at cold water and a kind word. She thought about her grandfather in Berlin, who used to take her to the park on Sundays, who would buy her ice cream and tell her stories about when he was young. Her grandfather was dead now, killed in a bombing raid. The park was a crater. The ice cream shop was rubble. But here in Montana, drinking cold water with a man who should be her enemy, Kat felt something she had not felt since before the war. She felt human again. But the real test would not come until the temperature dropped below zero, and the women discovered that Americans do not just talk about kindness. They act on it. The blanket incident. December 1944. The first blizzard. Temperature fell to 15 below zero. Wind chill twice that. Montana winter arrived like a fist, sudden and brutal. The bunkhouse stove burned hot. Wade made sure it was always loaded with wood, but Montana winters do not care about preparation. The women huddled under their 2 blankets, teeth chattering. They did not complain. Complaining was weakness. Complaining meant you were not grateful for what you had, and they were grateful. Compared to what they expected, this was luxury, but they were cold, bone-deep cold, the kind that makes sleep impossible. Kat wrote in her diary, hidden in her pillowcase by candlelight, December 3rd, 1944. We are cold but alive. The Americans feed us well, too well perhaps. I do not understand why they do not hate us more. Today, Mike asked if I had family in Germany. I told him my parents died in a bombing raid. He said, I'm sorry. Why would he be sorry? We started this war. We bombed London. We killed millions. Yet he says I'm sorry like I am human, like I deserve compassion. What have we done December 5th? 11 o'clock at night, Mike O'Brien did his nightly rounds, checking fences, making sure the cattle were secure, that nothing was amiss. When he passed near the bunkhouse, he heard sounds that made him stop. Not crying, shivering. 23 women trying not to make noise, but their bodies shook so violently the cots creaked. He could hear teeth chattering, hear the rustle of blankets pulled tight that still were not enough. Mike thought of his own sisters back in Boston, 3 of them all younger. He thought of his mother, who had raised 7 kids through the Depression, who knew what cold and hunger felt like, who had taught him that kindness was not weakness. He went to the storage barn, found 4 extra wool blankets, thick ones meant for cattle drives in spring, heavy, warm, worth good money. He carried them to the bunkhouse, knocked twice on the door, set the blankets down, and walked away quickly before anyone could see who brought them. December 6th, 5:30 in the morning. Kat woke first. She always did. Old military habit. She opened the door to check the weather and nearly tripped over the bundle. 4 thick, warm blankets. No note, no explanation. She brought them inside. The women gathered around, touching the wool, feeling the weight, the quality. Ingrid said it is a trap. Emma said, what kind of trap involves warm blankets? Greta touched one, felt how soft it was against her fingers. These are expensive, she said. In Germany, only officers get blankets like this. Kat thought for a moment, then said someone who works here brought these. Someone who heard us shivering and cared. That afternoon, Kat saw Mike cleaning tools in the barn. She approached carefully, carrying something wrapped in cloth. She said in careful English, Mr. Mike, the women and I want thank you. Mike looked confused. Thank me for what? Kat unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small wooden horse carved by Catherine Richter, 31, former carpenter's daughter. The carving was rough, the proportions not quite right, but it was made with care, with time, with the best skill they had to offer. For the blankets, Kat said, we know it was you. Mike's eyes filled with tears. He took the horse, turned it over in his work-roughened hands. You did not have to do this, he whispered. Kat said you did not have to bring blankets. But you did. In Germany, we say, eine gute Tat verdient eine andere. One good deed deserves another. Mike stood there in the barn holding a wooden horse carved by the enemy, crying. Not ashamed, just overwhelmed by this simple exchange. This proof that even in war, humans could still choose kindness. Wade Coleman saw it from across the yard. He had been planning to confront Mike about fraternizing with prisoners. Regulations existed for a reason. Lines needed to be maintained. But watching Mike's face, seeing the horse, hearing Kat's broken English expressing gratitude, Wade turned and walked away. That night, Wade went to Tom Hendricks's office. Tom sat at his desk looking at a photograph of Bobby in his army uniform. Young face, proud smile, eyes full of belief that he was doing something important. Wade said, Boss, I need to tell you something. Tom said, if it's about Mike and the blankets, I already know. Wade said, you're going to fire him, so I just set down Bobby's photo. Looked out the window toward the bunkhouse where lamplight glowed soft in the darkness. No, Tom said quietly, I'm not. Because if Bobby were somewhere freezing in a German camp, I would pray some German farmer would bring him blankets, even if that farmer was the enemy. Tom's words caught in his throat. They are not soldiers anymore, Wade. They are just people, scared coal people. And maybe if we treat them like people, it means Bobby did not die for nothing. Wade nodded slowly. Something in his chest that had been frozen since Charles died began to thaw. Just a little. Just enough to let light in. The real test of Tom's resolve would come in 3 weeks, when a letter arrived from Berlin, and the truth inside would shatter everything the women thought they knew about their homeland. Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1944. The Red Cross delivered mail to prisoner of war camps across America. For the German women at Riverside Ranch, that mail would bring more than news from home. It would bring the first cracks in the lie they had lived their entire lives. Kat received 3 envelopes, all delayed for months by the machinery of war and bureaucracy. Her hands shook as she held them. Emma stood beside her. Greta watched from across the room. Around them, the other women opened their own letters, and one by one the crying began. Kat opened the first envelope with fingers that would not stop trembling. The paper inside was thin, nearly transparent, the kind you used when paper was scarce and every sheet precious. Her mother's handwriting, shakier than she remembered, covered both sides in cramped German script. Meine liebe Katharina, my beloved Katharina, Berlin is gone. Our neighborhood was bombed 3 nights in a row in September. The building where you played as a child, where Frau Goldstein used to give you cookies, is rubble. The bakery where we bought Sunday rolls, remember how your father always let you pick the one with the most poppy seeds as a crater in the ground? Your father, Kat, your father tried to save the Goldsteins from their cellar. Their building was hit during the second night. He heard them screaming underneath the debris. He went in to pull them out while the fires were still burning. The roof collapsed. They buried him with 14 others in a mass grave in Treptower Park. There was no coffin. There was no ceremony. Just bodies wrapped in canvas and dirt. I am living in what remains of our basement. I have one candle that I save for emergencies. I have some potatoes that I found growing in the crater where the Muller's house used to be. And I have faith that you are alive, that somehow you survived, that we will see each other again when this madness ends. If you ever read this, know that I love you. Know that I am proud you survived. Know that your father's last words were your name. Your mother who loves you, always Mutti. Kat read it 3 times. Her father dead, Berlin destroyed. The world she knew, the streets she had walked, the neighbors she had grown up with, all gone, reduced to rubble in memory. She picked up the second envelope, postmarked November 1944. 2 months after the first letter, her hands shook harder now. Katerina, the rumors are getting worse. People are saying terrible things about camps in Poland and other places to the east. About trains taking Jews to places called Auschwitz and Treblinka. About gas chambers disguised as shower rooms. About ovens built for purposes I cannot write down because I cannot believe them even as I form the words in my mind. They say these stories are Allied propaganda, lies meant to demoralize us. But Katerina, the Goldsteins are gone. The Cohens who lived on the 3rd floor are gone. The Rosenfelds who ran the tailor shop vanished. All of them, every Jewish family in our neighborhood. They said they were being relocated for work in the East. Where did they go? I asked Frau Schmidt. You remember her, the old woman who always complained about noise. I asked her if she knew what happened to our Jewish neighbors. She looked at me with eyes that held no light and said, "We do not ask those questions anymore. I do not know if I want to know the answer." Your mother. Kat's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers about camps. Everyone in the Wehrmacht had heard whispers. But they were just rumors, propaganda things the enemy said to make Germany look bad. They could not be real, could not be true. The third envelope was not from her mother. The return address showed a different name. Frau Schmidt, the neighbor. Fräulein Weber. I regret to inform you that your mother passed away on December 11th during another air raid. She was in the basement when a bomb hit the building directly. Death was instant. She did not suffer. I was with her that afternoon. We shared tea, though it was really just hot water, with some herbs we found growing near the river. She spoke of you often. She was so proud of you. She wanted me to tell you something if I ever had the chance to write. She said, tell Katerina to forgive herself. Tell her she did not know. I do not know what she meant by that, but those were her last words before the siren started and we went to the basement for the final time. My condolences. May God have mercy on us all. Frau Schmidt. Kat stared at the letter, the words blurred. Orphan. She was an orphan at 26. Everyone she had loved, everyone who had loved her dead. The apartment where she grew up, destroyed. The city she had called home, a ruin. And her mother's last message. Forgive yourself. You did not know. Didn't know what around the mess hall, similar scenes unfolded like dominoes falling. Emma Hartman read that her entire family was killed when Munich was firebombed in April. Her father, mother, 2 younger brothers, all dead in one night. Their apartment building no longer existed. The street where she had learned to ride a bicycle was now a parking lot for military vehicles. Greta Neumann learned that her father's bakery, the one his grandfather had built in 1887, was destroyed. Not by bombs, by looters who broke in looking for food, found nothing and burned it in frustration. Her 2 older brothers were missing in action on the Eastern Front, presumed dead in the retreat from Stalingrad. Her mother was sick with tuberculosis, no medicine available, living with strangers who took pity on a woman slowly dying alone. Helena Zimmerman, the pregnant one, received news that her parents were killed in the siege of Hamburg. Her husband, the baby's father, had died at Stalingrad 8 months ago. She was carrying the last member of her family in her womb, and that child would be born in enemy territory, a citizen of nowhere belonging to nothing. Of 23 women, 18 lost at least one immediate family member. 11 lost both parents. 7 lost siblings. 4 became completely alone in the world like Kat, every connection to their past severed by bombs and bullets and the insatiable hunger of war. The crying was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was the sound of souls breaking. Quiet, constant. The kind of grief that has no voice because the pain is too deep for sound. Maggie's choice. Maggie Hendricks heard the crying from the kitchen where she was preparing Christmas Eve dinner. Not the joyful noise of celebration. The opposite. The sound of hearts shattering. She set down her mixing bowl, wiped flour from her hands, walked to the mess hall. 23 women bent over letters, shoulders shaking. Some completely silent in shock. Others making small animal sounds of pain. Papers scattered on tables. Envelopes torn open. Words in German that she could not read but understood perfectly because grief speaks every language. Maggie thought of Bobby, of the telegram, of the officer who brought it to her door, hat in hands, eyes down, voice reciting words he had said too many times before. Of the nights she had cried into her pillow so Tom would not hear, trying to be strong, trying to hold together when everything inside her was breaking. She did not think, did not plan, just moved. She went to Kat first. Kat was staring at the wall, tears streaming down her face but making no sound. Just silent grief, the worst kind. Maggie sat beside her and put a hand on Kat's shoulder. Kat flinched like she had been struck, then turned, looked into Maggie's eyes with confusion and pain and desperate need for comfort from anywhere, even from an enemy. Maggie said quietly, "I lost my son." Kat whispered, "I lost everyone." Maggie pulled her into a hug. Kat resisted for 3 seconds, body stiff, trained not to show weakness. Then she collapsed into Maggie's arms like a child sobbing, with her whole body making sounds she had held back for months, maybe years. Around the room, the crying grew louder. Permission granted to grieve. Emma curled into a ball on the bench. Greta rocked back and forth, arms wrapped around herself. Helena held her pregnant belly and wailed in German, my baby, what world am I bringing you into?" Mike O'Brien stood in the doorway, his cheerful Irish face wet with tears. Wade Coleman turned away, wiping his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, angry at himself for crying, angry at the world that made this necessary. Samuel Washington stepped outside into the cold Montana night because he could not watch this without breaking. Tom Hendricks came to see what the commotion was about. Stood in the doorway beside Mike. Saw his wife holding a German woman who was sobbing in her arms. Saw letters scattered on tables. Saw grief that matched his own. For the first time since Bobby died, Tom felt something other than hatred. He felt human. Silent night. That night, Christmas Eve, the women could not sleep. Kat lay in her cot watching shadows dance across wooden walls. The stove burned low, casting flickering light. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and quiet, covering in Montana in white forgiveness. But inside, the women were still trapped in their grief. Finally, Greta began to sing, so quietly at first that Kat almost did not hear it. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. Silent night, holy night. One by one, the others joined. 23 voices broken and beautiful, singing a Christmas carol in the language of the enemy. Singing because humans need to sing when words fail. Singing because music is prayer when you have no prayers left. Outside, Tom and Maggie stood listening. They had come to check on the women, make sure the stove had enough wood. Make sure they were warm enough. Maggie spoke low. Bobby used to sing that. We would sing it together on Christmas Eve when he was little. Remember, you would play guitar. He would sit on my lap. We were so happy. Tom nodded, unable to speak. The memory was a knife. Then Maggie did something that shocked him. She began singing along in English, Silent Night, Holy Night. All is calm, all is bright. The German women heard her voice joining theirs from outside the bunkhouse. They paused, uncertain, then kept singing, harmonizing with the American woman who had lost her son to their country's war. Tom closed his eyes. felt something break inside him, felt tears he had been holding for 6 months finally fall hot on his cold cheeks, melting into his beard. He walked to the bunkhouse door, opened it. 23 women stopped singing, terrified. They had never seen him inside their space before. He was the boss, the owner, the man whose son they had killed by proxy of nationality. Tom's voice was rough, barely controlled. "Merry Christmas," he said. "I know you are hurting. I know you lost people. So did we. But tonight, we are not enemies. We are just people missing the ones we love." He turned and left before they could respond, before his voice broke completely. Kat whispered to the others in German, he cried. "Did you see?" He cried for us. The photographs. January 15th, 1945. Captain David Lawrence returned to Riverside Ranch. He looked pale, shaken like he had not slept in days. He probably had not. What he had seen would make sleep difficult for the rest of his life. He gathered the women in the mess hall, set up a projector, the kind used for military briefings. His hands shook as he loaded the slides. "I have something to show you," he said through Kat's translation. "It is difficult. It is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "It is the truth, and you need to see it." The first slide clicked into place. Auschwitz, January 1945. Just liberated by Soviet forces. Bodies stacked like firewood. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Naked, emaciated limbs, twisted faces frozen in expressions of final agony. Not bodies. Skeletons covered in skin barely recognizable as human. Emma Hartman ran from the room. The sound of her vomiting echoed from outside. The second slide. Survivors standing behind barbed wire. Children with empty eyes. Women who weighed maybe 60 pounds, ribs visible through torn dresses. Men who looked like walking corpses staring at the camera with faces that held no hope, no relief, just the exhausted knowledge that they had survived when so many had not. Greta Newman began trembling, her whole body shaking like she was freezing. The third slide. Gas chambers disguised as shower rooms. The walls still stained. Scratches on the ceiling where fingernails had clawed for air that would not come. Piles of shoes outside. Children's shoes, tiny shoes for babies who would never learn to walk. Helena Zimmerman held her pregnant belly, whispering over and over in German, "Nein, das kann nicht sein." No, no, this cannot be. More slides. Ovens built for burning human remains. Train cars that had transported people to their death's floors, still covered in human waste and dried blood. Mass graves discovered in the forest, hundreds of bodies shot and thrown into pits. Documentation showing the systematic, industrial planned nature of it all. This was not chaos. This was not the accidental tragedy of war. This was organized murder on a scale that defied comprehension. 6 million Jews, Poles, Romani, disabled people, political prisoners, homosexuals, anyone the regime deemed unworthy of life. Captain Lawrence's voice shook as he explained through Kat's translation. "This is what your government did. This is what the Nazi regime built while you served, while you operated radios and treated wounded soldiers and baked bread for officers, while you did your duty." Ingrid Vogel, the hardliner, the one whose father had been SS, stood up. "Lies," she screamed. "Allied propaganda. They faked these photographs to make us look evil." Kat stood up, faced Ingrid, and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Stop," Kat screamed back. "Stop lying to yourself." My mother's last words were, "You did not know." This is what she meant. "The Goldsteins are neighbors who gave me cookies when I was 6. They did not go east for work. They went to these places to die. And we served the people who did this. We defended them. We believed them." Ingrid staggered back, hand on her cheek where a red mark was forming. Kat collapsed into a chair, buried her face in her hands, and said in German, "We defended hell itself, Samuel Washington." The black guard, who had been quietly kind, spoke up. His voice was hard, harder than they had ever heard it. "You want to know something?" he said. "In America, I cannot eat at the same lunch counter as white folks in some places. Cannot use the same bathroom. Cannot vote in some states. My people were enslaved for 250 years. We are still fighting for equality every single day." The women looked at him, confused why he was saying this. Sam continued, "But you know what we never did? We never built gas chambers. We never systematically murdered millions. America has got problems, big ones, and I live with them every day. But what your country did, that is not just evil. That is hell. And yeah, you served that hell. But now you know, so the question is, what are you going to do about it? Eight's diary. That night, Cat wrote by candlelight, hands shaking so hard the words were barely legible. January 15th, 1945. I cannot sleep. I see the photographs when I close my eyes. I see the faces of the Goldstein children who used to play in our street. Rachel was 7, David was 5. They had dark curls and bright eyes, and they would chase each other around the fountain in summer. I remember how they disappeared one night in 1942, how we were told they relocated for work, how we believed it because not believing meant asking questions, and asking questions was dangerous. I see their faces in those photographs. Among the children with empty eyes, among the bodies stacked like wood. How could we be so blind? The American Guard, as Samuel told us something true today. He said America has problems. He said his people suffer. But he also said America never built death factories. He is right. I do not know who I am anymore. I am not the girl who joined the Wehrmacht believing we were defending civilization. I am not a Nazi. I spit on that word. I would burn every swastika I ever wore. But I am German, and Germany did these things. Mrs. Hendricks brought me tea tonight. Real tea, not ersatz. She sat with me while I cried. She did not judge. She did not lecture. She just sat. How can she be so kind to people whose government murdered millions? Mike said something last week when we were repairing fences. He said in America we judge people by their actions, not their birth. I did not understand then. Now I do. I cannot change what Germany did. I cannot bring back the Goldstein children or the millions of others. But I can change what I do. Tomorrow I will ask Mrs. Hendricks to teach me to bake American pies. Because I want to build things, not destroy them. I want to create, not kill. It is not redemption. I do not deserve redemption. But it is a start. The weeks after the photographs were the hardest. The women moved through their work like ghosts, physically present, but mentally elsewhere. Kat stopped writing in her diary for 2 weeks. Emma barely spoke. Greta refused to eat until Maggie sat with her and insisted. Slowly, painfully, they began to rebuild. Not who they were. That girl was dead. But who they could become. The proposal. February 1945. Maggie watched the German women work through their grief by throwing themselves into labor. Kat learned to bake pies standing beside Maggie in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar with precision, learned in the military, applying it now to crusts and fillings. Emma helped in the medical bay when one of the ranch hands got pneumonia, working alongside the local doctor, proving that healing had no nationality. Greta repaired fences with Wade, her carpenter's daughter skills making her valuable in ways that transcended the prisoner and guard relationship. The line between prisoner and worker had blurred. They were something in between, something without a name yet. One afternoon, while kneading dough, Kat asked Mrs. Hendricks, "What is Thanksgiving?" Maggie explained. "A day to give thanks for blessings, to gather family, to share a meal together, to remember that even in hard times we have things to be grateful for." Kat nodded thoughtfully. In Germany, we had Erntedankfest Harvest Festival. My family would gather. My father would carve the goose. My mother would make Apfelstrudel with apples from our tree. We would sit together, and my father would say a prayer, thanking God for the harvest. Her words caught in her throat. I will never have that again. Maggie's heart clenched like a fist around broken glass. She thought of Bobby, of Thanksgiving dinners they would never share, of the grandchildren she would never cook for, of all the future moments stolen by war. Then she thought something that surprised her. What if we could give these women one good memory, one moment of family before they are sent back to the ruins? That night she told Tom, I want to invite them to Thanksgiving dinner, at our table, in our home, as our guests. Tom's first reaction was immediate and visceral. Absolutely not, Maggie said quietly. Tom. He stood up from his chair, paced to the window. They are German, Beggy. Bobby died because of them. Bobby died because of Hitler. These women did not kill our son, and they are suffering too. Tom slammed his hand on the windowsill. I cannot sit at a table with them and pretend everything is fine. I am not asking you to pretend, Maggie said. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I am asking you to be bigger than your grief, bigger than hate. I am asking you to show them what America really is, what Bobby believed in enough to die for. Tom pulled away, walked to the mantel, picked up Bobby's photograph. Young face smiling in army uniform. Eyes full of belief that he was doing something important, something noble. Maggie continued. Bobby wrote to us from England before D-Day. Remember what he said? He said, I am fighting so people can live in peace, so enemies can become friends, so the world can be better than it was. That is what America is about, Dad. Tom stood there holding his son's photograph, tears falling onto the glass. It is February, he said finally. Thanksgiving is 9 months away. Maggie nodded. I know. That gives us time to prepare. Them and us, time to decide if we are brave enough. And if the town finds out, Tom asked, if the Veterans Association protests, if they boycott the ranch, then they are not the Americans I thought they were, Maggie said. Tom looked at his wife, this woman who had buried her only child and somehow found room in her heart for compassion instead of vengeance. He thought of Bobby's last letter. He thought of the women in the bunkhouse who cried themselves to sleep every night. He thought of Kat learning to bake pies, trying to create something good with hands that had served evil. He closed his eyes, took a breath that shook his whole body. Okay, he whispered. Okay, we will do it. The secret spreads. Maggie told the women in March. Gathered them in the mess hall after dinner. Told them through Kat's translation about Thanksgiving, about the tradition, about the meal they would prepare together. And I would like to invite you, Maggie said, to share that meal with us. At our family table, as our guests, Kat translated, then stood there in shock, unable to believe what she had just said. Emma asked in German, she wants us at her family table, after what our country did. Maggie, not understanding the words, but understanding the tone, said through Kat, yes, because that is what Thanksgiving means, being thankful for what we have. And what I have is the chance to choose love over hate. My son died for that choice. I will not dishonor his memory by choosing hate. Greta burst into tears, covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Why would you show such kindness? Even Ingrid, who had been a hardliner, who had denied the Holocaust photographs until the evidence was overwhelming, broke down. She spoke softly. I do not deserve this, Maggie said gently. None of us deserve grace. That is what makes it grace. But the plan had to stay secret. Maggie knew the town would not approve yet, would not understand. So they would prepare quietly through the spring and summer, and in November, when the time was right, they would make their stand. Secrets do not stay secret in small towns. And when Sheriff Douglas Martin found out about Maggie's plan, he would do everything in his power to stop it, even if it meant destroying Tom Hendricks. The sheriff's visit, June 1945. The war in Europe had ended. Germany surrendered. But the prisoners at Riverside Ranch remained because repatriation took time, paperwork, logistics, 1,000 bureaucratic reasons that kept them in Montana through the summer. Sheriff Douglas Martin drove up to the ranch unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. Tom met him on the porch. They had known each other 20 years, fought fires together, helped neighbors through the Depression, been to each other's children's weddings. Douglas did not waste time with pleasantries. Tom, he said, people are saying you are treating the Germans like family, that Maggie is teaching them to bake, that you let them eat at the same tables as your men. Tom said evenly, that is all true. Douglas's jaw tightened. Have you lost your mind? Your boy died fighting these people. My boy died fighting Nazis, Tom corrected. These women are not Nazis anymore. If they ever really were, they are just people trying to survive. Douglas leaned against the porch rail. The Veterans Association is meeting tonight. They want the prisoners moved to a military facility. They think you are compromised, that grief has made you soft. Tom's voice went cold as Montana winter. Tell them I said they can go to hell. Douglas shook his head slowly. I am trying to help you, Tom. There are men in this town who lost sons, brothers, husbands. They do not see people when they look at your prisoners. They see the enemy, and they are getting angry. Some are talking about taking action. Tom said, let them be angry. This is my ranch, my choice. Then I cannot protect you, Douglas said quietly. When they come, and they will come, you will be on your own. He climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving dust hanging in the summer air like a question. The Escape, September 1945. Ingrid Vogel and Marlene Koch. Two women still struggling with guilt and identity decided they could not stay in America. They needed to go home, needed to help rebuild what they had helped destroy, even if only by complicity and ignorance. One night they cut the fence. It was barely guarded anymore because trust had been earned, and ran toward the mountains. Their plan was desperate, stupid, doomed from the start. Reach Canada somehow. Find a way back to Europe. Help fix the broken world. Wade Coleman noticed they were missing during the 2 a.m. check. Woke Sam and Mike. They grabbed horses and rode into the darkness. 3 hours later, they found the women huddled in a ravine. Marlene had fallen broken, her ankle badly boned, visible through skin. Ingrid was trying to splint it with sticks and torn pieces of her dress. Wade dismounted, rifle in hand. Ingrid stood protectively over Marlene. She shouted in German words Wade did not understand, but tone he did. But help her first. Wade stared at her. Remembered his brother Charles dying alone on a frozen battlefield in Belgium. Wondered if some German soldier had helped him or just left him to freeze. He lowered the rifle, knelt beside Marlene. "Let me see that ankle," he said. While Wade worked cleaning the wound, setting the bone as best he could in the field, a rattlesnake emerged from the rocks. Montana prairie rattlers are deadly, their venom fast-acting. It coiled near Wade's exposed neck, ready to strike. Ingrid saw it first, did not hesitate. Grabbed a rock and brought it down on the snake's head with all her strength. Killed it instantly. Saved Wade Coleman's life. Wade looked at her. She looked back, breathing hard, still holding the bloody rock. He said quietly, "We are even now." They rode back to the ranch in silence. No punishment, no consequences. Just Wade saying as they arrived, "Don't run again. You have got nowhere better to go." That night, Ingrid sat with Kat and Emma in the bunkhouse. "I am sorry," she murmured. "I am so sorry for denying the Holocaust, for clinging to the lies, for trying to run." Kat hugged her. "We were all lied to. The difference is now we know the truth, and we choose to be better." Ingrid asked the question they all carried. "Do you think we can ever be forgiven?" Emma said softly. "The Americans have already forgiven us. The question is, can we forgive ourselves?" That became the central question as summer turned to autumn and Thanksgiving approached. November preparation. November 1st, 3 weeks until Thanksgiving. Maggie and the German women worked together in the kitchen, preparing for the meal that would either heal wounds or tear the community apart. Probably both. They learned to season turkey Kat's hands, rubbing herbs under skin, the smell making her cry because it reminded her of her mother's kitchen in Berlin. They made stuffing from bread cubes and sage and celery. They whipped potatoes with real butter and cream. In Germany, they had used water and lard when they had potatoes at all. They baked pies, apple and pumpkin, and pecan. The first 3 burned because the ranch oven ran hotter than expected. They laughed about it, actually laughed, 23 German women and 1 American woman standing in a smoky kitchen, laughing at ruined pies like it was the funniest thing in the world. Maggie watched them, saw joy returning to faces that had been marked by grief for so long. She told Tom that evening they are not German anymore. Not really. They are becoming something new. November 22nd, the day before Thanksgiving. Tom and his men set up tables in the main house dining room, extended them to seat 35 people. Tom and Maggie, 23 German women, Mike and Wade and Sam, 5 other ranch hands, and Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. O'Malley, 2 mothers from town who had stood up for the plan when others condemned it. The table stretched 30 feet, covered in Maggie's best tablecloths, the ones she had saved for special occasions that never seemed special enough. Outside, Sheriff Martin had stationed deputies on the road leading to the ranch. For everyone's safety, he claimed. Tom knew better. They were there to intimidate, to remind him that the town was watching. He did not care anymore. But no one, not Tom, not Maggie, not the women, expected what would happen at 5:47 p.m. on November 23rd, just 13 minutes before dinner was supposed to start. Sheriff Martin arrived with 10 men. Veterans angry, some of them armed though weapons, were not drawn yet. They stood in Tom's yard like an army preparing for battle. "Tom," the sheriff said, "I am asking you one last time. Cancel this dinner." Tom stood on his porch, flanked by Mike O'Brien and Wade Coleman. Samuel Washington remained in the doorway, hand resting near his rifle, not threatening, but ready. The autumn air was cold breath visible, the sun dropping behind the mountains and painting the sky in shades of fire. Douglas said again, "Tom, cancel this dinner. You still have time to do the right thing. Tom's voice was quiet but carried across the yard. The right thing. You want to tell me what the right thing is, Douglas? Because I thought the right thing was treating people with dignity. I thought the right thing was showing mercy. I thought that was what we fought for. One of the veterans stepped forward. Carl Jenkins lost his leg at Anzio, walked with a cane, now would for the rest of his life. His face was twisted with anger and pain that had nowhere else to go. My brother died in the Ardennes, Carl shouted, froze to death in a foxhole waiting for reinforcements that never came. And you are feeding the people who killed him. You are inviting them to your table like they are family. Tom looked at Carl, really looked at him. Saw a man destroyed by loss, looking for someone to blame, something to hate because hate was easier than grief. Tom said your brother died fighting fascism, Carl. And what is fascism? It is hate. It is prejudice. It is deciding some people do not deserve dignity because of where they were born, what they look like, who they pray to. If I turn these women away because of their nationality, because of a war they did not start, because of crimes they did not commit, then your brother died for nothing. The words hung in the cold air. Carl stared at Tom. His face worked through emotions like watching seasons change in fast motion. Anger, confusion, recognition, something that might have been understanding. Finally, he said, voice breaking, "You are a better man than me, Tom Hendricks." He turned and limped away, cane tapping on frozen ground. One by one, the other veterans followed. Not all of them. Two young hotheads boys, really too young to have served, but full of rage borrowed from their fathers, stood their ground. Sheriff Martin looked at them. His voice carried the weight of authority. Boys, go home. They hesitated. Martin's hand went to his belt, rested on his pistol. Not threatening, just reminding. The boys left. Douglas looked at Tom for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I hope you know what you are doing." Tom said, "So do I." The sheriff drove away. The yard was empty except for the people who belonged there. Tom let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like hours. His hands were shaking. Wade put a hand on his shoulder. "Boss, that took guts." Tom shook his head. "That took something. I am not sure it was guts. Might have just been stubbornness." Inside the house, Maggie had watched through the window. When Tom came in, she hugged him without words. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other, preparing for what came next. 6 o'clock. Time for dinner. The gathering. The German women entered the dining room like they were walking into a church. Hesitant, reverent, overwhelmed by what they saw. The table stretched before them, longer than any table they had seen outside of military mess halls. But this was different. This was family. White tablecloths, Maggie's good china, the set her grandmother had brought from Ohio, crystal glasses that caught the lamplight and threw rainbows across the walls, silverware polished until it gleamed. And the food. The turkey sat at the head of the table where Tom would carve it. 25 pounds of golden brown bird skin, crispy and glistening with butter and herbs. Steam rose from it, carrying smells that made mouths water and hearts ache with memory. Around it, bowls overflowing with sides, mashed potatoes whipped smooth and rich, gravy in a porcelain boat, stuffing fragrant with sage and onion, green beans with almonds, corn, cranberry sauce both jellied and whole berry because Maggie could never decide which was better. Rolls so fresh they were still warm, butter melting into them. On the sideboard, pies, apple, pumpkin, pecan, 3 of each because Maggie believed you could never have too much pie. It was abundance. It was America. It was everything they had been told did not exist, served on plates that proved the lie. Kat whispered to Emma in German. "Is this real?" Emma whispered back. "I think this is what freedom tastes like." Tom stood at the head of the table. His hands shook as he picked up the carving knife. The room fell silent. Everyone sat waiting. The German women in their cleanest dresses mended and pressed. The American ranch hands in their Sunday shirts. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. O'Malley, 2 mothers who had lost sons but chosen grace over vengeance, sitting like guardians of hope. Tom opened his mouth to speak, closed it, tried again. When his voice came, it was barely controlled. "A year ago," he said, "I buried my son. 6 months ago, I wanted to die too. I blamed everyone. Germany, the war, God." The women flinched, Kat's eyes filled with tears before he even continued. "Then you came," Tom went on, And I had to choose, would I let hate destroy me, or would I honor Bobby by being the man he believed I could be? He paused, looked down at the knife in his hand. You have worked hard. You have shown kindness. You have suffered same as us. Today you are not prisoners. Today you are family. Maggie rose from her chair, vision blurred, not bothering to wipe her eyes. Please, she said simply, sit, eat, be welcome in our home. Be welcome at our table. Be welcome in our hearts. The breaking Tom began carving the turkey. The knife moved through tender meat, each slice perfect, each portion generous. He placed the first slice on a plate, added stuffing, passed it down the table. The first plate went to Kat. She stared at it, this symbol of everything she had been taught to despise about America. This decadent feast, this wasteful abundance, this proof that everything she had believed was a lie. She picked up her fork. Her hand trembled so badly she almost dropped it. Cut a piece of turkey, brought it to her mouth. The taste was not just food. It was more than flavor, more than sustenance. It was acceptance. It was forgiveness. It was the possibility of belonging again after being lost for so long. It was home. Kat began to cry. Not quiet tears. Deep body-shaking sobs that came from a place she had kept locked away for years. She tried to eat through the crying, tried to maintain some dignity, but could not. The grief and relief and gratitude were too big to contain. Then Emma, then Greta, then all 23 women were crying, trying to eat through tears, overwhelmed by this impossible grace being offered by people who had every right to hate them. Helena held baby Hope and whispered in German, "This is your first Thanksgiving, meine Kleine, my little one. Remember this. Remember that people can choose love over hate. Remember that enemies can become family." Maggie moved around the table, hugging each woman. Some stiffened, not used to physical affection. Others collapsed into her arms like children who had been waiting their whole lives to be held. She spoke softly to each one, "You are safe here. You belong here. You are home." Wade Coleman, tough as nails cowboy who had lost his brother and sworn never to forgive, wiped his eyes and turned away. But Mike saw. They all saw. The hardest man at the table crying for women he was supposed to guard, not love. Mike O'Brien did not bother hiding. He cried openly, his Irish face red and wet, refilling water glasses with shaking hands, grateful for something to do with his hands while his heart broke open. Samuel Washington sat beside Kat. When she could finally breathe enough to look at him, he said quietly, "You asked me once why we are kind when we do not have to be. This is why. Because kindness is stronger than hate. Every single time. Because choosing love when hate is easier is what makes us human." Halfway through the meal, Kat stood up. The room fell silent. She swayed slightly, overwhelmed by emotion and food and the weight of the moment. In halting English, carefully practiced words, she said, "Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks, we do not have words, in German or English, for what you give us today." She faltered, swallowing hard, then continued, "You lose your son. We are part of the country that take him from you. And you give us Turkey and PI and family. You give us home when we have no home. You give us hope when we deserve nothing." Tears streamed down her face. "My mother, before she died in the bombs, she say to me, 'Forgive yourself, you did not know.' I did not understand. Now I do. She mean do not carry hate, carry hope instead." Kat looked around the table at the other women, then back to Tom and Maggie. "In Germany, they tell us America is weak, is bad, is enemy. But I think America is strongest country in the world. Not because of bombs or soldiers or weapons. Because you know how to forgive. And forgiveness is not weakness." Her voice rose with conviction. "Forgiveness is the bravest thing humans can do." She sat down, overwhelmed, unable to say more. Tom stood up, raised his glass of apple cider, the closest thing to wine they had. His voice was thick with emotion. "To second chances," he said. "To choosing hope over hate. To my son, Bobby, who would have loved every one of you. And to the idea that even in our darkest hour, we can still choose to be kind." Everyone raised their glasses. "To kindness," they said together. English and German accents mixing, voices breaking, hearts healing. They drank. The decision. December 1945. Repatriation orders came from Washington. The war was over. Prisoners needed to return home. Germany needed rebuilding. Families needed reuniting. The women had to choose. return to the ruins of their homeland, or apply to stay in America under the new Displaced Persons Act for people who had nowhere to return to, no family, left no home standing. Tom and Maggie offered to sponsor anyone who wanted to stay, help with paperwork, provide housing and work until they could stand on their own, pay for lawyers if needed. The women gathered in the bunkhouse for their final meeting as a group. Kat spoke first. "Some of us need to stay," she said in German, "where we found forgiveness, where we learned what it means to be human again. Others need to go back, need to help rebuild what was broken, need to create in Germany what we found here in America." She looked around at her sisters because that is what they had become. Neither choice is wrong. Both require courage. The vote was quiet, personal, each woman making the choice that felt right for her soul. 9 women chose to stay, including Kat, Emma, Greta, and Helena, with baby Hope. 14 women chose to return, including Ingrid, who felt called to teach German children the truth about what their country had done to make sure it never happened again. The day they said goodbye, January 1946, was cold and clear. The women who were leaving boarded a bus that would take them to a port, then a ship, then home. The women who were staying stood in the yard waving. They hugged, they cried. They promised to write to remember to carry each other in their hearts, no matter how many miles separated them. Ingrid hugged Kat last, whispered in German, "Thank you for slapping me. Thank you for making me see the truth." Kat hugged her back. "Thank you for saving Wade's life, for showing that we can change." As the bus pulled away, Maggie put her arm around Kat's shoulders. "Ready to start your new life?" Kat nodded, watching the bus disappear down the road. "I think I already have." The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Kat learned English, earned citizenship, built a life from rubble and hope. And every Thanksgiving, the table grew longer as new family members arrived. 20 years later, November 1965, Katerina Weber O'Brien stood in her kitchen in Billings, Montana, preparing Thanksgiving dinner for her family. She had married Mike in 1947, a quiet ceremony with Maggie and Tom standing as witnesses. They had 3 children, Bobby named for the boy who died so they could live, Margaret named for the woman who showed her grace, and Thomas named for the man who chose forgiveness over vengeance. The kitchen smelled like turkey and pie and coffee, like Thanksgiving, like home. Mike walked in, kissed her cheek. His red hair was going gray now. The freckles had faded, but the smile was the same. Still came easy, still came often. "Smells like Montana heaven," he said. Kat smiled. After 20 years, her English was perfect, but she still heard her mother's accent in her own voice sometimes, still dreamed in German occasionally, still carried Berlin in her heart, even as Montana had become her home. On the mantel sat a photograph from Thanksgiving, 1945. Tom and Maggie at the head of a long table. 23 German women, the ranch hands, all of them smiling, all of them free. Tom had passed in 1962. Heart attack while fixing a fence, died doing what he loved. Maggie followed in 1963. Cancer went quietly in her sleep. But their legacy lived in every person at that table and every child, those people raised in every act of kindness that rippled outward from that one brave choice. The other women who stayed had built lives too. Emma was chief nurse at Billings Hospital, now married to a Jewish doctor who had lost his entire family in the camps. Together, they healed people, healed each other, proved that love could grow even in soil soaked with blood. Greta owned 3 bakeries across Montana. Her apple strudel was legendary, made from her grandmother's recipe, connecting past and present in flour and sugar and memory. Helena taught kindergarten. Her daughter Hope was in college, now studying international relations, working toward a world where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. The 14 who returned had built lives in Germany too. Letters arrived regularly, crossing the ocean, carrying news. Ingrid was a history teacher in Berlin, teaching about the Holocaust so it would never happen again, so German children would know the truth. Marlene worked with refugees, paying forward the kindness she had received. Others rebuilt, reconciled, remembered. They had all become bridges between 2 worlds, living proof that enemies could become family, that forgiveness was possible, that the future did not have to be poisoned by the past. Kat's son Bobby, 18, now tall and strong, like his father, came into the kitchen. "Mom," he said, "why do we always tell the story? Every Thanksgiving, you tell us about that first dinner in 1945. We know it by heart. Kat stopped stirring the gravy, looked at her son, this American boy who would never know hunger, never know war, never know what it meant to be enemy in a foreign land. Because she said some stories need to be remembered. Not just remembered, retold, passed down, kept alive. She turned to face him fully. Your grandfather Hendrix, the one you are named after, made a choice. The hardest choice of his life. He chose to forgive people who represented everything that had hurt him. He chose to see us as human when it would have been so much easier to see us as enemy. Bobby nodded. I know, Mom, you have told me. Kat continued anyway. But do you know why that matters? Why it matters today in 1965, 20 years later? Bobby shook his head. Because Kat said choosing hate is easy. Hate makes you feel strong. Hate gives you someone to blame. Hate shrinks your heart until there is no room for anything else. But love, real, love, brave, love that is hard. It requires you to be bigger than your pain, to see the humanity in your enemy, to choose hope when revenge would be easier. She touched her son's face. That is why we tell the story. So you remember that you come from people who chose love. So when you face your own hard choices, and you remember that forgiveness is possible, that enemies can become family, that one meal shared in kindness can change the world. Bobby hugged his mother. I understand, he said quietly. The doorbell rang, guests arriving, the house filled with voices and laughter. Some of the voices spoke with German accents, the other women who stayed and their families. Some spoke with Montana drawls, some with the careful English of children raised by immigrants. They gathered around a table that was not as long as the one in 1945, but held just as much love. They held hands while Mike said grace. They ate turkey and pie. They told stories. They laughed. And for a little while in that house in Montana, the world was exactly as it should be, the legacy. The story of Riverside Ranch spread like seeds on wind, covered in newspapers, studied in universities. In 1978, the ranch became a Montana landmark. That 30-foot table was preserved in a museum. But the real legacy was not in wooden photographs. It was in the choice. Tom Hendricks chose hope over hate. Maggie chose compassion over bitterness. 23 German women chose to build instead of carrying shame forever. They were not perfect. They struggled. They doubted. But they chose love anyway. And that choice echoes through time. Every time someone sees humanity in their enemy, every time kindness wins over vengeance. So this Thanksgiving, remember Montana. Remember that hatred can end. It just takes someone brave enough to say, not me, not today. It just takes someone willing to set a table and say, you are welcome here. All it takes is the courage to try. The Cowboys said, taste the turkey and pie, and they tasted home.